Driving instructors of Reddit, who was the worst student you had, or the craziest drive you had? I'm a driving instructor. Had a low confidence 16-year-old driver on the highway for the first time. Got her in the middle lane doing 65 when she states, "I think I'm gonna fall asleep." As my mind is processing, WTF did she just say? I look over at her, and her head goes clunk up against the driver's window and her eyes are closed, and she looked passed out. Her hands are still on the wheel, but she turned to the left. Now we are in the left lane heading toward the median. Her foot went to the floor. I tried to get the car back onto the pavement, and I had to switch hands, because I needed to get her foot off the accelerator, and get the steering back under control. I got the car back onto the roadway, under control, and headed for the breakdown lane on the right side. With my heart thumping, I got the car stopped. At this point, the driver sits up alertly, laughs and says, "Haha, what did I miss?" She had narcolepsy and she nor her parents ever told anyone. I was obligated to notify the MV, and her permit was revoked until she was certified by her doctor. Her parents were mad, but you and I are alive because we got her off the road. That was insanely irresponsible of her parents to allow her to even get a permit with untreated narcolepsy. This is not that surprising. Parents hate the idea of admitting that they have a sick child. One of the greatest forms of ableism is not admitting that your child might have something wrong with them. Apparently it's some pride thing. Frick that pride crap. Someone could die if not taken care of with a doctor. I'm a driving instructor, but I teach people to drive semis. The worst student I ever had already had 4 years of driving experience with what's called a Rocky set, 45-foot trailer with a 28 trailer behind it. This person couldn't turn for crap. I still wonder how they never hit anyone. So, when I train it to 28s, that's all they pull for 2 weeks. So, we take our second turn, a left onto a pretty wide street, and they're turning like they're in a car. Like, not even into the intersection and they've already started to turn. I tell them no, straighten out and go forward until I tell you to turn. They keep turning. I say no, straighten out and go forward until you pass the double yellow lines. They keep turning, and if they keep turning like this, we are going to clip another car turning left. At this point I say no, straight. Just go straight. Thankfully he does. I tell them to pull over and they do. At this point, I turn to them and scream, "What the frick was that? Give me the keys, I'm driving." I take them back to an intersection, make a right and tell them that's how you turn wide. Pull over at a gas station and switch back out. Same thing, crap turns. I ask them what they are doing. "I'm turning, boss." I say, "No, go deeper, you're going to hit someone." It took me 5 days just get them to turn. He's a good driver though, just needed some edges worked off. He probably just knocked the edges off with his rig. Funny. Oh crap, I can finally tell this story. I did the drive exams for the state government for a few years here, US. My second week I had an elderly woman, about 80, scheduled for a test. She was a permanent resident from Nigeria and knew very little English. Just how little, I would soon find out. We go through the starting instructions and the vehicle check, and eventually get started. The first thing to do at my location was pull out of the parking lot to the right on a fairly busy 2-lane street. She did not stop to check for traffic. She just turned on out. Lots of angry honking ensued. Also, an immediate failure of the exam. There was a cul-de-sac on the right side about half a mile down the street that we could use to turn around that had a stoplight. So we did that. I had to physically point all the directions to her because of her limited English. Instead of wrapping around the cul-de-sac to turn around, she did a 3-point turn there. At this point, I was not surprised. If I was more experienced, I would have taken over and driven back at this point. Hindsight is a bitch. We lucked into a green left turn arrow and started our return to the branch. Some of the more astute drivers may notice that we would need to turn left to get back to our starting point. There is no stoplight at this turn, but there is a nice turn lane dividing the two sides of the road. I point at the entrance to the parking lot and the following exchange occurs. Me, left turn there. Huh, left, me, left. Huh, left, me, yes, left. Okay. And she merges left into the turning lane and continues driving past our turn. No big deal. We will take the next turn and go across the parking lot of the nearby store. We have a very familiar exchange. Me, left turn there. Left. Me, left. Left. Me, yes, left. Okay. And she merges left again. If you have a few wrinkles in your brain, you may realize that this puts us driving against oncoming traffic. A couple of cars swerve by as I grab the wheel and yank us back into the turn lane. I unbuckle my seatbelt so I can reach my leg over to her side of the car and slam the brake to stop at the oncoming red light. This whole time, she says nothing. We wrap back around into the parking lot. I'm still steering and manage, somehow, to pull into a parking spot safely. I'm in the middle of questioning my life choices when she taps my shoulder and says 3 words that I will never forget. I do good. No ma'am. No you did not. But I couldn't explain her mistakes in a way she understood, so she rescheduled her test 2 weeks away and the other drive examiner took her. It did not go well. Is there no written exam in the US before you do the practical exam? If she knew so little English she wouldn't be able to pass that, right? There is, but in my state it is all multiple choice, and you can take it every day. She had taken it quite a few times, and by either luck or memorization, she had managed to score a passing grade. Former instructor here. I was also the office manager for the driver's edition. I mostly did office work, but was certified to make extra cash on weekends and to fill in an emergency. My personal worst was a very sweet, very timid girl who was terrified to go anywhere near the speed limit if it were anything over 30. On back roads in the country that was terrifying. The worst one I can think of nearly caused an accident while on his driver's license test by just pulling out of the parking lot. That's obviously an automatic fail. So the kid and instructor come back and then the dad comes storming in mad that his kid failed. He's screaming at me and the instructor while the poor kid is sitting there head in hands obviously mortified by his dad's behavior. I ended up threatening to call the police to finally get him to leave. The absolute worst drive was after I left the company BC I moved, but it ended up in the news, so I found out. A kid and an instructor were on a drive. Great kid by all accounts. Another driver, a dude in his truck, was distracted on his phone and hit the driver's ed car. It wasn't a terrible accident, but BC of health problems the instructor had he ended up dying later at the hospital. RIP, Paul. I think I know about the last one. Was it on Indiana Highway 25 in the Buck Creek area? I'm not 100% sure the exact location but that's the right part of Indiana. For some reason I thought it was on 51, but I know Paul often took drives out that way. This is the opposite, but I'll never have the chance to share this story otherwise. I was doing my second behind the wheel with a driving instructor. I was already really nervous before I got in the car, and she said you're the last student I'll ever have. They fired me. After an awkward pause, while she stared at me, she laughed and said no, actually I'm moving to Chicago to work for a local news station. I didn't find it nearly as funny as she did lol. I was 8 lessons into learning, and just starting to feel quite confident when my instructor quit. Not just quit me, but quit teaching altogether. I did ask him if I was that bad. He assured me that it was nothing personal and he'd been headhunted to go back to his early career of building. Mine quit and went back into college teaching 2 lessons before my test. Luckily another instructor at the school had a similar car. Obligatory not a driving instructor but mine told me about all the worst drivers he's had. He told me about a girl I went to school with, IDKY he shared names, and how she refused to get close to the speed limit, and he was worried she'd fail because she was too careful. I asked if he's ever felt like he was in danger, and he talked about a guy a long time ago that went way too fast and refused to slow down, blew a stoplight, and eventually got pulled over by a cop during his driving lesson. I went to school with a guy who failed his driving test the first time because he went too slow. My classmate failed 4 times, every time a different reason. I gave my 450 driver trainer a heart attack. I was in the second week of a full-time class, which was one-on-one after the other potential trainee was kicked out. The training was being funded by my employer at the time. We were doing road exercises at this point, where we would leave the plant, and my trainer would just give me random instructions. Turn left at X road, turn right up here, change lanes after we pass the bowling alley sort of thing. One morning, he was really late. We were supposed to get started at 6 AM, but he didn't show up to the plant until 6:45. When he did show up, he wasn't looking so great, but we hopped in the cab and got underway after a pre-trip inspection anyway. Not long into the drive, he told me to park at the upcoming gas station, which was odd because it wasn't a diesel station. Then he told me to stay in the cab while he went inside. I was waiting and waiting and waiting a little more. This was valuable practice for being a truck driver, BTW. Then the plant manager, who was also sort of a regional manager, showed up, which was weird, and asked how things were going. Which was weirder, because he was so far above me, I couldn't have guessed what it mattered to him, but we talked about my training a little bit. Then an ambulance showed up, and then the plant manager told me that my instructor thought he was having a heart attack, which is why I was parked in an on-truck gas station. And also, that to get the truck back to the plant manager was going to be my temporary instructor. I was nervous as hell and worried about my regular instructor, who was in the hospital at this point. But when we made it back to the plant, the manager was like, "Well, you're actually good at this. I'm pretty confident Bill's not having a coronary because of you." Specifically, it was still the morning, so I went back to my home plant, since I didn't want to just leave for the day, but there wasn't anything I could do work-wise at the training facility. As soon as I walked in, people were dropping to their knees, keeling over desks, knocking into walls, pretending to have heart attacks left and right. My supervisors, the office ladies, some other random driver who was checking in early. I never freaking lived that one down. I'm sorry, was Bill alright? Forgot that part. Yep. It was a very minor heart attack as far as such things go. I actually can't remember if it was an actual attack or some kind of warning rumble, because he was back in a week. Not instructor and anti-bad driving. Instructor would fall asleep for short naps. At the time, my twin sister and myself, 15F turning 16, did our driver's ed together in July. Our 16th birthday was in mid-July, and in our state temps were at 15 and 1/2, and you could test after your birthday when driver's ed was complete. We grew up in a pretty rural area and had plenty of experience on dirt bikes, four-wheelers, and a few months of driving with our parents and close family friends, ranging from small two-door cars to full-size SUVs. So we were both pretty comfortable behind the wheel. Lau was our instructor and was the sweetest older black gentleman that unfortunately did not have any account in his teaching car. So when you're spending 8 hours, we would do 4-hour shifts in a car in July. It gets pretty miserable with all of the normal tedious training and the parallel parking practice. He was so comfortable with our driving when we could actually get back onto the country roads 45 miles per hour, and the car would cool down real nice, and he would just kind of doze off. At first we were like, oh no, do we stop? Do we just keep driving? So I just kept driving for probably close to a half hour through the lovely countryside, when he finally woke up and just chuckled and was like, "Oh, well, I guess I'm pretty comfortable with your driving," and chuckled some more and had us stop somewhere for him to buy us all some snacks. Similar experience in Georgia. Older white instructor would fall asleep while I drove. I had my permit and driven a lot with my parents, so was a pretty good driver. He also would ask if I had errands to run or people I wanted to see. Then we would go get snacks or see my friends. Good times. My instructor used to let me use my driving lessons to get to and from school. Lol. I was spending PS10 on a lesson, but saved PS1 by not getting the bus, so it was pretty cool. I'm not an instructor, but this happened while I was in the car with an instructor and another student. 7 years ago I decided to get driving lessons for myself and my brother. We had the same instructor teach us both at the same time in the same car by taking turns driving for 2 hours a day. Sounds tedious, but was good fun to learn together. One day, the instructor got a call while teaching us, and he told us that he had another student, a middle-aged lady, who had her driving test the next day and was panicking and wanted to urgently do a quick driving recap right away. The instructor wanted my brother and I to accompany him to this lady's house and wait for 10 15 minutes while he took her for a spin in the car. We agreed and got to the lady's house. My brother and I are now in the backseat. The lady is driving with the instructor guiding her from the passenger seat. She starts driving from the front of her house, which is a quiet street. But we can see that this street goes ahead and intersects with a very busy road ahead. As we get closer to the intersection, the instructor tells her to stop. The lady proceeds to ask if she should press the brake alone or press the brake along with the clutch. Meanwhile, the car is approaching the intersection. The instructor says stop, hit the brake, and this lady proceeds to argue, saying she's confused which type of brake she should use. Finally, the handbrake was pulled, and the lady was strongly advised to postpone her test, to say the least. Kind of the opposite of the question, but I went to a driving school that was just wild. Now, a lot of the driving schools in town are pretty low class, often just one or two guys with cars and an office. This driving school was a big national company which had their own offices and employed half a dozen driving instructors. The big selling point of this driving school was their defensive driving curriculum. This included things like always having your full lights on, not just your running lights for visibility. But the big thing in the curriculum was distance between cars. Their rule was that you had to leave at least 3 full car lengths between you and the car in front of you when you were stopped at the light. The idea was that if you were going to be rear-ended, you had room to get out of the way. This led to bizarre situations of me having to hang back halfway down the block while waiting at a red light with the drivers in the other lane all gawking at me and wondering why I wasn't moving up. Ultimately, they abandoned that idea, I think. I haven't seen any other cars doing it since then. Because of the obvious reasons that I'm sure you have all figured out, that it is far more dangerous to behave unusually on the road. I had a lady like this in front of me once. She left enough space to comfortably fit a 747 in there. You might laugh, but if everyone drove like that, it would increase traffic flow drastically. Every time someone brakes, the red brake lights come on and the car behind brakes. If you have a good braking distance, you can absorb small slowdowns in front of you just by easing off the gas a bit. If everyone did that, then sudden slowdowns for whatever reason would dissipate over distance. This is the style of driving that, if everyone followed, would allow very busy highways that are usually car parks to actually flow properly. However, that will never happen, because even a slightly larger than normal braking distance will get mistaken by some idiot in a BMW or Audi for their pulling in space.